Hello, and welcome to this exciting episode of Ranking the World's Worst People. In this channel, we walk you through the life and evil acts of the worst people in the world, and then we rank them at the end of each episode. Our goal is to put all the worst people who have ever lived in one single league with videos that let you know exactly what they've done. In today's episode, we'll be taking a look at one of the most disturbing serial killers of all time, Albert Fish.
There was a period of his life where he went off to Europe and apparently spent a lot of time in these male brothels. I think he was probably a male prostitute himself and indulged in all kinds of sadomasochistic, homosexual stuff.
Serial killers tend to have similar motivations, but not all of them are the same. Their behaviors differ from one another. Serial killers can be classified under different subcategories, the most recognized subcategories being the visionary, mission, hedonistic, and control serial killers. A hedonistic serial killer, or thrill killer, seeks sexual satisfaction through the murder, using time-consuming techniques like dismemberment, necrophilia, mutilation, and many more to murder their victims. There is an extension to the hedonistic subcategory, one that does not kill for sexual gratification for a prime motive, called a hedonistic, comfort-oriented killer. In this case, the killing is for personal gain. Albert Fish, our focus for today's discussion, falls into this subcategory because he had lured children inside his home and would torture them in multiple ways. Albert Fish is an organized, non-social, hedonistic, psychopathic serial killer. Some of the acts of torture would include a paddle laced with sharp nails, and he would later sexually assault them. As he continued to do these acts, he eventually murdered and cannibalized his victims, primarily children.
The letter read,
My dear Mrs. Budd, I call on you at 406 West 15th Street. Brought you pot cheese, strawberries. We had lunch. Grace sat in my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her, on the pretense of taking her to a party. You said yes, she could go. I took her to an empty house in Westchester I had already picked out. When we got there, I told her to remain outside. She picked wildflowers. I went upstairs and stripped all my clothes off. I knew if I did not, I would get her blood on them. When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then I hid in a closet until she was in the room. When she saw me all naked, she began to cry and tried to run downstairs. I grabbed her and she said she would tell her mama. First I stripped her naked. How she did kick, bite, and scratch. I choked her to death, then cut her in small pieces so I could take my meat to my rooms, cook and eat it. How sweet and tender her little ass was roasted in the oven. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body.
How is one man capable of committing unthinkable crimes such as these? Continue watching this video to find out. But just before we get into that, leave a comment to let us know what score you'll give to a hedonistic, comfort-oriented killer such as Albert Fish. Also, click on that like button now because you're definitely gonna like this video. Who was Albert Fish? Albert Fish, whose real name was Hamilton Howard Fish, was born in Washington, D.C. on May 19, 1870. His father, Randall Fish, who was 75 at the time of his birth, was 43 years older than his mother. Fish's father died shortly after Fish was born, and Fish's mother couldn't take care of Fish or his siblings. As a result of his mother's inability to take care of him, Fish ended up in a cruel orphanage, where the caretakers often beat the children, even encouraging the children to hurt each other. Fish was 5 years old, the youngest of the boys in the orphanage, so he was exposed to numerous acts of perversion and physical abuse. Quite disturbingly, Fish derived pleasure in these beatings. In fact, when his mother eventually took him back, he couldn't help but administer self-afflicted beatings in his spare time. Before long, Fish had developed a psychosexual fixation on the correlation between pleasure and pain. He had become a full-fledged sadomasochist. Roots of insanity. Many members of Fish's family had mental illness, with one particularly suffering from religious mania. One of Fish's brothers was issued into a state mental institution. His sister was identified with a mental affliction. Also, his mother experienced oral and visual hallucinations. 3 other relatives of his were diagnosed with mental illnesses. Fish's experience at the orphanage changed his life forever. When asked about the orphanage, Fish had this to say: "I wasn't there till I was nearly 9, and that's where I got started wrong. We were unmercifully whipped. I saw boys doing many things they should not have done." Life outside the orphanage. By 1880, Ellen Fish, Fish's mother, had secured a government job. Being gainfully employed, she was able to take Fish out of the orphanage, but it was rather too late. He had been introduced to practices that he now was obsessed with. In 1882, at age 12, Fish began a homosexual relationship with a telegraph boy. He was introduced to practices such as urolania, drinking urine, and coprophagia, eating feces. Fish became so obsessed with these practices that he started visiting public bathhouses to watch boys undress. Life of crime. As Fish grew older, he moved to New York to become a male prostitute.
There was a period of his life where he went off to Europe and apparently spent a lot of time in these male brothels. I think he was probably a male prostitute himself and indulged in all kinds of sadomasochistic homosexual stuff.
In that time, he began sexually assaulting young boys. Fish claimed to have had children in every state, although it's not known whether his statement was true. According to him, in 1890, he relocated to New York, and began his crimes against children. Fish lured children from their homes, tortured them in various ways, his favorite being using a paddle laced with sharp nails. He even went on to rape them. As time went on, his sexual fantasies with children grew more fiendish and bizarre, often ending in murdering and cannibalizing them. He mainly targeted African American or mentally challenged children because, according to him, police would spend less time searching for the killer of an African American child than of a Caucasian child. In 1898, Fish married a 19-year-old woman and had 6 children with her. His wife eventually abandoned him and their children for another man. Although Fish had never abused his children, he encouraged them to participate in his sadomasochist games. In one of such games, he asked the children to hit him with the nail-filled paddle until blood ran down his legs. He also derived gratification from pushing needles deep into his skin.
When he was in jail, he began complaining that he was having this difficulty sitting and so on and so forth. And when the prison physicians came to talk to him about it, he said that one form of pleasure that he got was inserting needles up between his legs into his perineum and leaving them lodged inside his lower body. And of course, nobody believed this was the case, and they x-rayed him, and in fact, they found, when the x-rays were developed, they found there were 27 needles of varying sizes that were shoved up into his pelvic region. This was just one of many forms of incredibly masochistic behavior that Fish indulged in. You know, he was a masochist and a sadist, a classic case of someone for whom pleasure and pain are completely inseparable.
After his marriage ended, Fish wrote to women whose names he got from the personal columns of newspapers, describing explicitly the various sexual acts he would like to share with them. The descriptions in his letters were so despicable and disgusting that they were never made public, although later they were submitted as evidence in court. According to Fish, however, none of the women ever responded to his letters asking them for their hand in administering pain. During 1898, he worked as a house painter, but he continued to molest boys younger than the age of 6. Now, there was almost no way back for Fish. His sexual preferences were out of the ordinary, and it soon devolved into extreme BDSM gone wrong. He became inquisitive about what inflicting unwanted pain on others would be like. He began a sadomasochistic relationship with a house painter named Thomas Kedden. 10 days into their relationship, Fish locked Kedden into an abandoned farmhouse. He was going to kill him, cut him up, and take his cut-up body home. He stated that he discarded the idea because he thought that the hot weather would attract people to him. He instead tortured Kedden, going on to cut off half of Kedden's penis. As about what he felt while doing all these things, Fish remarked, "I shall never forget his scream or the look he gave me." Then he probably thought he had had enough for the day, so he wrapped Kedden's penis in a Vaseline-lined handkerchief. Fish tossed Thomas Kedden a $10 bill for his trouble and kissed him goodbye. arrest, and death. Fish continued to commit heinous crimes against young boys until the police eventually caught up with him. May 25th, 1928, Fish saw a classified advertisement that read, "Young man, 18, wishes position in country. Edward Budd, 406 West 15th Street." 3 days later, Fish, then at 58 years old, visited the Budd family acting like he was going to hire Edward. According to Fish, the intention he had was to tie up Edward and mutilate him and leave him to bleed out. He introduced himself to the family as Frank Howard, and he promised to hire Budd and his friend Willie, claiming that he would come for them in a few days. He didn't show up on the set day, but he apologized and set another date. When Fish returned, he met Grace Budd and immediately changed his prospective victim from Edward to Grace. He made up a story that he had to attend his niece's birthday party, convincing Grace's parent to let Grace go with him. That was the last time the family saw Grace. Fish took Grace to one of his houses in upstate New York, but made her wait and play outside for a while. In his confession, Fish claimed that he undressed himself while she played, so as not to get his clothes dirty with blood. He then beckoned from a window for Grace to come inside. He said he hid in the closet until she had fully entered the room. When Grace saw Fish naked, she began to cry and told him that she would tell her mother. He stated that Grace tried to run, but he trapped her in a room where he proceeded to torture and kill her.
When she saw me all naked, she began to cry and tried to run downstairs. I grabbed her and she said she would tell her mama. First I stripped her naked. How she did kick, bite, and scratch. I choked her to death, then cut her in small pieces so I could take my meat to my rooms, cook and eat it. How sweet and tender her little ass was roasted in the oven. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body. I did not fuck her, though I could have had I wished. She died a virgin.
Before Grace, Fish's victim of choice was actually young boys, and indeed it would be this little girl who would lead to his capture. Police had investigated Grace's disappearance for 6 years, but found nothing concrete. On September 5th, 1930, the police arrested a 66-year-old superintendent, Charles Edward Pope, as a suspect, who was accused by his estranged wife. After spending 108 days in jail, he was found not guilty in November 1934. Surprisingly, the lead that the police needed came from Fish himself. On November 11th, 1934, Fish sent an anonymous letter to Grace's parents detailing the murder and cannibalism of their daughter, and this eventually led to his capture. Fish tortured Mrs. Budd with details about the empty house her daughter was taken to in Worcester, New York, how she was stripped of her clothing, strangled, and cut into pieces and eaten. The letter was delivered in an envelope that had NYPCBA, that represented the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. During the investigation into the letter, a janitor at the company told the police that he had took some of the stationery home, but left them at his house before moving out. The landlady of the house later mentioned that Fish checked out of that particular room a few days earlier. She stated that Fish's son sent him money, and Fish asked her to hold his next check for him. The chief investigator on the case, William King, intercepted the check and waited for Fish outside the room. At first, Fish agreed to go to the headquarters to be questioned, but he tried to escape by pulling out a razor. King was able to immediately disarm him, and Fish was taken to the headquarters. At the headquarters, Fish made no attempt to deny the charges brought up against him. He confessed without any pressure and with much enthusiasm. So galvanized was he to divulge the details of his many murders. He stated that the intention was to kill Edward Budd, not Grace. He remarked that he had never had the intention to rape Grace, but he later admitted to his attorney that, while kneeling on Grace's chest and strangling her, he had 2 involuntary ejaculations. This information was later used at the trial to make the claim that the kidnapping was sexually motivated, thereby avoiding any mention of cannibalism. The trial of the murder of Grace Budd started on March 11, 1935 in New York, and it lasted for 10 days. Fish confessed to over a dozen murders, but police were only able to verify 3 with evidence. Among one of Fish's most brutal confessions was the kidnapping and killing of a boy named Billy Gaffney. In his recount of Billy's mutilation, Fish had this to say: I whipped his bare behind till the blood ran from his legs. I cut off his ears, nose, slit his mouth from ear to ear, gouged out his eyes. He was dead then. I stuck the knife in his belly and held my mouth to his body and drank his blood. During his trial, Fish was evaluated by psychologist Dr. Wortham. It was gathered that Fish confessed to Dr. Wortham that he had at least 100 more victims than anyone knew about. Fish also narrated how he derived pleasure in hurting himself. He claimed to have stuck needles into his body, between his rectum and scrotum. Dr. Wortham found it difficult to believe that a human was capable of doing that to himself, so he had an x-ray done on Fish. The x-ray confirmed Fish's claim. Some of the needles he had stuck in far were still there. 29 needles, to be precise. Fish also stated that he would stick cotton balls in alcohol and stick them in his rectum and set them on fire. He claimed that he did the same to some of his unfortunate victims. In his statement to Dr. Wortham, Fish said, "I always had the desire to inflict pain on others and have others inflict pain on me. I always seem to enjoy everything that hurts." Fish was later examined by psychiatrists, and they claimed that he confessed to more than 10 sexual fetishes. Among them were pedophilia, infibulation, and exhibitionism, sadism, masochism, flagellation, cunnilingus, analingus, fellatio, picarism, voyeurism, and cannibalism. In his confession, Fish claimed that God had instructed him to molest, kill, and eat his victims, and the defense pleaded insanity at his trial. It was noted that Fish's case was a psychiatric phenomenon, and that no one in medical records had ever exhibited so many sexual abnormalities. Even though Fish had demonstrably been proven insane, the jury felt he should be executed anyway. Fish got to prison in March 1935, and he was executed on January 16, 1936, in the electric chair at Sing Sing Prison, New York. Reportedly, a process Fish looked upon as the ultimate sexual thrill. He was buried in the Sing Sing Prison Cemetery. Reports about his execution claimed that he helped the executioner put the electrodes on his body. Fish wrote his final statement hours before his death, but his lawyer James Dempsey refused to let anyone see it. He stated, "I will never show it to anyone. It was the most filthy string of obscenities that I have ever read." So, did he have any moral beliefs? It is safe to say that it is either Fish had a twisted perception of what was right or wrong, or he could not differentiate right from wrong at all. Considering the fact he had begun to kidnap, torture, and kill even before he started having hallucinations, we can say that he knew exactly what he was doing. However, he believed that he was doing God's work, but claimed that he had no idea why he really did the things he did. Maybe his rough past has a hand in how he turned out to be, or maybe it's the insanity that ran in his family. We'll leave you to be the judge of that. What do you think? Fish was executed even when he was proven to be insane. Do you think that the death penalty was too harsh a punishment for him? Do you feel he deserved a worse punishment than he got, having committed all of those crimes? Let us know in the comments section below. Ratings. Albert Fish had a rough childhood. He had to be whisked off to a rather terrible orphanage where his life changed forever. However, he might have had the opportunity to do better, but he didn't. Going by our ratings, where 1 is refusing to tip and 100 is burning a house down on purpose, we'd give Albert Fish a solid 100, because he did worse than burning a house. How would you rate him? Leave us a comment in the comments section, and at the end of the season, we'll go through all the comments and make a revised list of all the people we've rated. Don't forget to like this video. Also, hit that subscribe button to get updated when we rank the next horrible person. Also, feel free to join our Patreon site. You'll get access to exclusive merch, and will also be able to help us vote for who we will rank in our next season. See you next time!